we're really needing to think about how the individual experienced that trauma and how we get out of that trauma and how we help that person who has managed to get stuck or fallen into those types of experiences that we've been talking about. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Through a Therapist's Eyes. This is October the 20th. We are recording. We have the panel with Victoria and Kasie, whom have not been able to join us this evening. And I'm also going to remind you that next week we have our first kind of week in review for the whole months of shows. It's going to be fun. We're going to do that with Adam, the co-host that you guys have met from before. So, John, we're going to be talking about religious cults and toxic religious experiments.
Well, some of it's experiments.
Indeed, right? Yeah. I don't know if that was a Freudian or not, but
Freudian slip.
Freudian slip.
Yeah.
So we have off the get-go, I want you to think about these questions about toxic religious experiences and such. Do you know what a cult even is? I find a lot of mystery about that, and can you imagine yourself being caught up in this? Because a lot of people, I think, believe falsely, never me. And I would question that, and I will challenge you with that. And then how do you recover from this? I'm sure yourself or you know people or you have concerns about people that have had weird religious experiences. And it's a weird thing to think, like, how do I talk to them? How do I deal with that? How do I help them out? How do I get out of this myself? It's a lot of dramatic kind of realities. But John, how you doing today, man?
Outstanding.
Yeah?
It's a good Navy day.
A good Navy day.
Yeah.
You have to explain that for folks that missed the introductory show.
Blue skies, following seas, fair winds.
Is that?
Yeah.
You are truly a Navy guy, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. Amen.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
Haze gray and on the way.
It's fantastic. So we have the book Rediscovering Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self. Struggle in there to remember that. We are kind of switching a little bit to YouTube, so we're kind of touting that up a little bit. If you go to the YouTube channel Through a Therapist's Eyes, just like Facebook and some of the other podcast channels, you can subscribe, and that gives you where it comes up onto your YouTube thing. A lot of people, John, I don't know, man. Did you know YouTube can be your primary TV viewing experience?
Yeah.
Dude, they do this.
I am so old. I have no concept of that. Yeah.
It's constant.
You know, I'm still with the antennas, you know.
I don't go back that far, but I'm kind of like, you know, I stream now. So,
Yeah.
So you can click the little bell there, and that gives you a notification when we do come on live when we're kind of doing that. So right now we're still on Facebook Live. 5-star reviews are really important to us. Give us some comments on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, and all that kind of stuff. Contact it Through a Therapist's Eyes is a great way to get up with us. Guys, this is the human emotional experience, and we do endeavor to figure this thing out together. Yeah, my kids, man, that's all they do. They watch YouTube.
How can you watch a movie on a smartphone? I don't know how you do that.
It's their thing, man. I think it's just the mobility factor. Wherever you go, it's there with you. Yeah. It's your little companion. And
I'm at the gym, like I said. I like working out, and then I see people that are working, and I could understand it. Like an iPad or a tablet or something like that, and you could watch something. But it's this little phone that they're watching their movies on.
Yeah, at least my screen is a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I could play my video games on there pretty well. But yeah, that's their entire TV screen.
Now you had video games when you were growing up, right?
Atari 2600, man.
Uh-huh.
Pac-Man.
Didn't have anything. We had Captain Kangaroo.
You had pinball, man.
Captain Kangaroo.
What are you talking about? You had pinball.
Well, we weren't allowed to go to the bus station to play pinball, and so that was a big thing.
Yeah.
You get out of school, and
go to the bus station.
Go to the bus station and play.
That's
pinball.
where they had pinball games?
Yeah,
at the bus station.
At the
no
bus
arcades.
Station. No
arcades.
No.
That
what
sucks.
was an arcade?
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, they had two. Was it Bally pinball machines?
That's funny. Were there were no was pinball like the first video gaming?
No, there was no video in there.
Well, I mean, the first arcade type games is what I mean. I mean, I guess there's no video component to a pinball, of course, but
right.
Well, now there probably is, but
I'm so old that they would have a guy that would have a T-shirt that would be rolled up, and they would put their pack of cigarettes in there, and they would have slick backed hair.
Oh yeah, Well, I'm there with you, man. What was that TV show? The dude, the guy,
Happy Days,
Happy Days 2 as well. That was I was there, and then
Laverne and Shirley.
Laverne and Shirley. Thank you. Yeah, the maintenance guy.
Right.
Would pop his cigarette thing in his thing. Yeah. What do you think about this topic tonight, man? Religious.
Well, you notice I'm talking about anything else but this.
Oh, are we divergent?
Yeah.
We are diverting.
You know, the thing is that we could talk about cults. We
Right.
can't, and I think we will. I think we can also talk about toxic religiosity, which can occur in mainline denominations or what is community churches or Bible churches. There's an element that is common, and that is it can get into like cultic behavior or thoughts. Religion, I think, I'm a Presbyterian minister, and I was ordained in 1979, so I'm again kind of mature.
Yeah,
but it's been very helpful. And it's a relationship that one has with God. What happens is that the person that's a toxic leader or actually has, I think it's a sense of a personality disorder, narcissism, perhaps antisocial person, even psychopathy. And that person would say, it's not about God, it's about me. That's right.
Me.
And Jim Jones, a perfect example. Somebody says that I'm jumping too far, maybe, but
one of the famous
one of the famous
examples.
said, "Don't believe in the Bible, believe in me."
Yeah.
And they followed him all the way down to Guyana.
Oh yeah, no, it's amazing how these true cults get together. But honestly, I think I might want to change the name of this particular episode, because what did I name it? Well, I named it Religious Trauma: The Effect on People, because I don't want to think that we're just going to talk about cults. I like what you kind of said about, there's this can be very evident in really mainstream religious experiences, insofar as the way people are experiencing their faith and their particular practices, particularly kids and all. And certainly when you get into the level of destructive things like cults, it's terrible bad. But I kind of want to frame our whole conversation around as well a lot of the experiences that you'll have in, like, Calvary chapels and, speaking in tongues with very non-cult traditions, such as, what am I thinking about? P. What's it begin with? P. Not Presbyterian, but
no, we don't speak in tongues.
No,
we can. We can.
But Protestant?
No, not Protestant either.
Pentecostal.
Yeah, that's it.
What you're...
just different faith traditions like that. So I also want to kind of lay out the get-go.
And most Pentecostals and apostolic folks, they're good, loving people.
Absolutely.
Not an
Oh,
issue.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. That is not a cult. I want to make that clear.
Right.
It's more, but there's some dramatic kind of experiences that, newcomers or young people will see and experience, like, whoa, what is this stuff, So I do want to kind of get out from the get-go here a qualification that I put out when I'm in therapy dealing with these issues, whenever religion comes up, because I treat that topic very seriously. And I'm sure a lot of people are tuning in to see, like, how is this therapist person going to deal with religion, right? What do these therapy people have to say about religion? Well, I go with it like this, and I explain to people, my clients, if you're my client and you're dealing with a religion thing that comes up in session, this is what I really always throw out there and tell people. I say that I don't qualify myself as a religious expert by any measure. I've heard it said that there are counselors that do Christian counseling, and then there's Christians that do counseling, and I'm in the latter variety. So I don't do Bible verses and this type of a thing. But I'm very comfortable in letting people know that I'm on my own Christian journey. And sometimes I have people from the same church that are, in therapy sessions with me, and we just say, like, I'll respect your boundaries, and I won't, you know how small towns are and stuff, John. And then I say that I'm very open to faith traditions. I'm not really pushy about different faith traditions. If it's an area of support for you, I will work with that, and we can incorporate that into what we do, and that's more than okay. So that's the qualifier that I like to put out to kind of clarify, what people's expectations and the fear of bringing that up and being judged or any of those types of things. And so this is a part of my therapy practice for sure. How do you deal with that?
Well, I would agree with you in terms of I'm a Christian who I don't say you're going to have to follow this, and this, and follow a set of rules but there's a sense of principles that I follow that I've got to say, and I'm unabashed about it. I have a Judeo-Christian worldview, but in that sense, it's a context that's there. When it comes up, the idea is that, well, I feel judged, or perhaps a person will project their own anxiety onto me because I tell them right away that who I am and in my experience. I don't hide that because I think that disclosure a limited self-disclosure is important.
Oh yeah. But so it creates a genuine reality of
Well, you want to bond with your client. You want and I even brought up an I-thou relationship, and I think that we talk about is that having people go from an I-it relationship, a transaction, but that's a religious concept, the I-thou. But that's not to impose that on somebody, but you treat people.
You're going to have to explain the I-thou to the I-it.
That was
what do you mean by that?
Martin Buber was a 20th century, mid-20th century philosopher. He was Jewish.
Okay.
And he talked about one's relationship with God, which is an I-thou relationship. God sees us in a very unconditional, as Rogers would say, unconditional positive regard.
Absolutely, right.
Loves us. Okay. Well, where we get mixed up, and I think Buber would say this, is that we treat people like we would treat somebody for a transaction. Used to, back when we had more of that personal touch at supermarkets, we would have somebody that would be scanning the
items for you.
The items for you.
They still do that every now and again.
Yeah, they do. but that's an I-it relationship, a transaction. You don't really interact with the person. You say, "How's your day?" The day's fine, and like our weather,
Sure.
Or how about those politics? You don't want to get into that too much.
Yeah, I don't hear that one anymore. Yeah. Sports and weather now.
Sports and weather. You stay away from stay away from that. But the I-thou relationship is the person that you're with, in terms of like in the counseling situation, is a thou, and that is a person is a subject and not an object. And so we do things differently in counseling now. We go face to face, or in psychotherapy. You don't sit behind and
it's not an I-it.
And not an I-it.
Okay. Yeah, I've never heard that. That's new to me. So in therapy, we are an I-thou relation.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
You're
cool.
Infinitely valued.
Absolutely.
Even you, Chris.
Seriously. Yeah. Well, thank you. But that's the best thing somebody said to me all week.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into this a little bit, because you come at this from a depthy kind of reality, I think. That's kind of why I chose this, to be honest with you. I knew that it was going to be
Thanks, Chris.
You and I together today. Well, and I mean that as a compliment, because
I know.
This is going to be super cool to see how you see this, because I know I've dealt with this a lot in therapy sessions. And I think that you probably have dealt with this a lot, equally so in therapy sessions. But you've also got the awesome experience of, as you said, you're a Presbyterian minister. Is that correct? So you have a congregation, and I think you shared some of that during the intro and alluded to it earlier today. So, like in working with people in that context, I'm sure you have like a lot of newcomers or people that have all kinds of trepidation. Like I have referred people to my pastor and other pastors I know to kind of help therapeutically bond with like the church community, and we're together working to heal and manage this crazy stuff that so many people have experienced.
You know, generally speaking, I think therapists need not to be frightened.
Love that.
Yeah.
Go there. That's a good segment. I didn't think of that, but for therapists listening out there, hit it.
Okay. To be able to refer their clients to whom they have already vetted, like you have with your pastor,
right?
That you know that person is going to be uplifting and caring and healing and accepting, and through that context of providing that kind of an alliance that will be able to help that person. And
yeah, that's interesting, John. I'm glad you jumped on that, because I don't know, maybe it's just because I've been doing this long enough. I'm kind of like, look, I mean, obviously you only do that when the client is interested and somebody's willing and wants to do that, which I find a lot of times they're not, which is like, cool, no problem.
It's okay. Well, I've had clients that say, not going to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, you can't talk about.
And the client's in charge.
But
so
that's exactly right.
But therapists would be very hesitant, I think, and a better word I think you use is fearful of that.
Right.
Like, why?
Well, and part of that is the tradition of like Ellis and also Freud, and there was sort of saying that this was somehow that religion was a negative force, and it can be a wonderful ally for healing, because it does, and in my context is that it's all about hope, it's about mercy, it's about grace, it's about acceptance.
Religion is.
Yes, religion is.
God is.
Faith is. God is. Yeah, religion is the lattice, is basically the structure.
You know what, John? A lot of people with their religious experiences have learned, unfortunately, the opposite.
Exactly.
Of a lot of those things. It's terrible. It's why I think it pisses me off, to be honest with you. Like, it bothers me when people have gone through some of the experiences that they've gone through with.
And the key is the thing with the cults, for example, is that it's all about the charismatic leader. And
that is one of the big characteristics.
The malignant narcissism that might be going on with that.
Those are big words.
Okay. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I mean, because we could spend more time on it. We actually did a show on narcissism, so people can check back on that. But
everybody loves my body sometime. I'm just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off of me.
There's your promo, Neil.
I'm just like heaven to touch. I want to hold me so much. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That.
You're probably going to have to edit that out.
Take the mic and roll with it.
Just got to edit that out.
No, we will not. Because
we sang that at seminary because there were people that had the inflated egos.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. That's it. So that was a part of seminary. You learned that there. Or they would sing that or whatever.
Well, we were experienced. We basically at seminary. I took about a third of my 3.5 years at seminary, which is the length of time it was at that time, taking courses in counseling, doing therapy, being in therapy ourselves, in counseling.
Right.
And part of that is that if you see yourself and you take that, that very severe mercy, basically, to see yourself, that microscope, you would and see yourself. It is kind of humbling, and it's not about you. It's about proclaiming good news.
And it's another little segment and snippet. That's why this panel platform, I think, is going to be awesome because you guys are all going to have your own experiences. I hadn't thought about going in that direction. So let's go, I think, a little further with that, John. Because that, to me, I haven't thought about that a lot, but I've got a couple of buddies that are pastors themselves. And, I've been in the Christian faith tradition for, I don't know, for a fast minute. And the reality of what a pastor experiences is a big part of the way religious traumatic realities get created. Let me say that again, right? The experience of being a pastor and what happens in that role for that individual man, or in some faith traditions, women, creates a lot of the very painful, religiously traumatic realities that people experience. And I think what I mean by that is what you're alluding to there. Like it becomes, you're at the pulpit. Mm-hmm. You think about this. If you put yourself in the shoes of you who do this, the pastor, you're preaching, you're giving messages about the Creator.
And speaking authoritatively.
Authority on the topic. Like, this easily becomes about me, the orator, me, the message deliverer, me, the person who knows, and you
start believing that press.
Right?
Yeah. But we have, and because at my seminary, Columbia Theological Seminary, is at the pulpit was a plaque that said, "Sir, we would see Jesus." And that is, instead of seeing the pastor, that person, it's not about
you.
It's not about the pastor. It's about hearing the word of God spoken and lived out.
But I can see where that really is a great challenge for the leadership role of a congregation.
Yeah.
It's constantly about you, the leader. The people might make it as such.
And you get people. Now, that's the other thing is that a lot. Let's say, for example, a lot of the abuse that's happened, and certainly in my own denomination, there's been abuse.
Right.
There was a scandal in, I think, at a mission school in Zaire 40 or 50 years ago. Where some of the people were having sexual liberties with the missionary children, because all the missionary children went to this school. And there was the sexual predation that was there. That's a horrible thing, obviously. Yeah.
Like I said, it pisses me off.
Yeah. And I think in response to that, a lot of denominations like the Episcopalians and the Lutherans, Presbyterians, and we're shrinking denominations, but we underwent a lot of psychological testings. We were.
Oh, really? The pastors?
Before we were even allowed to even begin seminary.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I had to take the MMPI. You know how crazy that is to take the
500 questions.
500 questions. And if you didn't think you had a problem before, you knew you had a problem after you did that. And
so what
one of the questions, can you?
No, I'm kidding.
No. I came out normal.
Okay, good.
But I did answer truthfully. Do you believe that you can talk to God or God talks to you? And I said, well, yeah. That's...
He's psychotic, y'all.
Yeah.
Let's move into a little bit of a section. Let's not spend much time on this at all. Well, actually, the first one, before we get to that, what is a cult? Right? Yeah. We alluded to it a little bit here, but that was one of our primary questions. And I want to say, what is a cult and what is also inappropriate religious experiences?
Okay.
Right? Well, how would you say that? You got show notes, but he does not even need to look at these things at all.
Okay. Well, I think in terms of a cult is where you do have and it could actually happen. Let's say with Jim Jones, there was Disciples of Christ. He was a Disciples of Christ minister, but he basically got himself away from what would be the traditional Judeo-Christian tenets and dogma.
Right.
And I don't mean dogma in a bad way. I'm talking about, in other words, what keeps us straight.
That's what the definition is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Structures,
so it's
guidelines.
What do we believe?
Yeah.
You know. And so he got away from that very quickly, and it all became about him. And so what you'll do is you'll find a cult that's typically built around
the leader,
the individual. A cult is in a sense going to burn itself out eventually because it doesn't talk and ascribe to higher things, and there will be coercion. There will be anything that let's say that would be anti-scriptural, and that is authoritarian. It will say it's authoritative, and its structure is authoritative, but it is not open to change, and that was the sense. It would also say revelation. Suddenly, people can just have sudden revelations, and if you have somebody that has a canon, that is a set of scriptures, it's not going to be subject to saying, "Well, God told me to do this now," and
the canon's not going to change.
The canon's
the
not
doctrine
change.
doesn't change.
That was developed in the first, and actually in the second centuries.
Let me give you my general take and see what you do with it. I mean, to me, it's religious practices that control a person's life, with a primary component of the church leader or leaders being in charge of your life.
That's a good definition.
Decisions and or behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I came up with.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, Google looked at it.
Dr. Google.
Hey, by the way, there's awesome episodes on this. We'll have them highlighted. But we had a lady named Lavon Earl who totally was a part of the Mormon faith tradition, and she wrote a book, Loved Into the Light, I think is what it was called. And we really got to meet with her, and she shared her story. John, it was amazing. You might want to check them out, just because I know this is a particular issue of interest to you. It was episode 117, basically all about cults and whatnot, and then also episode 139. That's what she specializes in. She does coaching to help people recover from this and get out of these religious traumatic experiences. So good highlight on that. Dr. Google, a relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister. That was a crappy definition. 2, a system of religious veneration and devotion directed towards a particular figure or object. Okay. 3.
Yeah, but that it could also be used in more of a classic definition of a cult in terms of like there's the cult of worship. Let's say there's a cult of Zeus, for example, back with the Greeks.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I liked this when they said a cult is a system of religious beliefs and rituals that is regarded as unorthodox or spurious with a great devotion to a person, idea, or thing. And so you kind of alluded to that as far as the canon and stuff.
I think people belonging to cults is not necessarily a bad thing if it doesn't have the authoritarian or the cultic.
Say that again. Cults or belonging to a cult is not a bad thing.
Not.
Is that what
be careful.
What?
Well, I'm looking.
What did he say?
What I was trying to say. Let me clarify.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay. Well, let's say it's a minority belief. And it's different. For example, the Shakers, they would be a cult. Do you know who the Shakers were?
I do not.
From the 19th century, they were a millennialist, believed that the end of the world was going to happen.
There have been many of those.
Yeah, and they were in Kentucky. They made wonderful furniture. Okay, so it wasn't just, but the men and women couldn't do it together. They couldn't. They couldn't do it. They were to separate. There was no sex because the end of the world was happening.
Goodness.
And so in other words, that was a cultic belief. And so
interesting.
Yeah. So, but it wasn't in the pernicious sense that it would be destructive of a person's life.
Pernicious sense. What does that mean?
Okay. In other words, there was an evil that was done to people. There, you could come and you could go.
It's funny, Neil. As we have John on the show, I'm learning how we interact, and this man is brilliant. And he has these words that we're going to have to clarify sometimes, John.
That's okay.
I love it.
Yeah. Well,
I love cool words.
I talk that way to my clients, and they go, "What?"
They're like starry-eyed, blank-eyed. Like,
yeah,
what did he say, John? What did he say, Paul?
yeah. That's my only thing is my vocabulary. So
it is awesome. I love cool words.
Yeah. This is what happens when you're raised up without the internet. You actually have to learn how to talk.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Converse.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. So while we're on this, I'll hit. We got an article that's cool that I think you could check out that hits like 7 signs. Opposing critical thinking. That was 1. 2, isolating members and penalizing them for leaving. Right?
Okay, another thing. I'll just interject on that, and that is restricting food.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and to do that. So, in other words, and that goes in with critical thinking.
Now, restricting food, that's different than, some faith traditions. I mean, I grew up Catholic. I was in the Catholic faith tradition as a
Don't
child.
eat meat
right,
on
don't
Fridays.
Eat meat on Fridays and this type of thing. That's
Fast
not
for
what
Lent.
we're talking about.
Yeah.
But what's the difference?
Okay. Well, one is that what they want to do, what a cult will do sometimes, is physically isolate you from your family and all that, but restrict your amount of protein that you get in your diet, and therefore you don't have enough, and so your thinking kind of gets wobbly.
Oh my God!
And so they could talk somebody like in the Jim Jones cult. They restricted diets all the time, and they had doctors that had joined that cult, medical doctors, and they and part of that
I'm finding myself getting pissed off at.
Yeah.
Oh God, that is just so wrong. It's religion, man. Yeah. Why? 3rd, emphasizing social doctrines outside of Scripture. 4, seeking inappropriate loyalty to their leaders. We talked about that. 5, dishonoring the family unit. You were just saying that.
Isolate them.
Yep.
They're the enemy.
6, crossing biblical boundaries of behavior versus sexual purity and personal ownership. And then 7, separation from the church. So those are some criteria. But I don't know. Let's move to this next segment that I had planned, because I think that gets us away from pure cult stuff.
So we're going to sing Losing My Religion.
And broaden it to other things. You're going to have to do the singing, bro. I don't do the singing, man. Go ahead and lose your religion. Knock it, man. You ready?
No, I think religion is a great thing.
Absolutely.
I think it's a faith. Absolutely.
But when it goes to things that are destructive, it's absolutely not. That's why it's like this divergence. So I want to broaden it. I think we already have broadened it a little bit, but here's a question. Can religious trauma exist outside of a cult?
Yeah, I think so.
I do too.
Yeah,
I mean,
think so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think, for example, when you have a youth director that is... And I think that churches can be culpable of this, and even areas of denominational doing this. Let's say a youth director who is like 25 or 26, and he has sexual relationships with a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah,
and then grooms another girl. In that sense, and that has happened. But
we have one of the biggest scandals, I think, honestly, in the history of man, and I mean it that way. We did some news stories. I wonder, we need an update actually on the news stories that Craig and I were doing in our current events. It's just crazy. The biggest scandal, I think, in the history of man being the Catholic Church sexual issues with kids and older boys and stuff.
And that's even worse.
Huge. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you, and I think that is something that has been hidden a lot of times.
That's why I think.
And you move
man,
sometimes. And I was talking about my own denomination, but you would move that one person to another church so that they could victimize another person instead, or they'll have them do a therapy and a treatment and say, okay, that's going to fix them. But I think the reality is that if you're dealing with somebody that is
straight up pedophilia.
Well, Wayne Oates, who was a psychologist and a theologian, and he was at I think it was a Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, University of Louisville Medical Center. He talked about that behind the mask. You get somebody that it just on the surface looks too good to be true, and it turns out to be bad.
Yeah.
And so that's a scandal. And so they come back and they exploit children.
I almost want to make this a bit of a soundbite, what I'm about to say, that we pull out, Neil, and maybe highlight, because I find that people really believe vehemently that this stuff that these folks are talking about on this show just wouldn't happen, just doesn't happen in my congregation in any way, shape, or form, as far as I would believe it to be. And I just want to say, like, loudly and clearly, be careful with that belief, because I think that this can be very rampant, even in your most mundane or run-of-the-mill kind of non-traditional churches that don't have any dramatized stories or cult characteristics and whatnot. There can be really destructive things that happen in these circles.
I served a church that it was in Texas, and it was in a small town, and this guy he had grown up, never married, was probably in his 70s, and he took, while we were having a church activity, by the way, it was getting ready for Vacation Bible School.
Okay.
Took a young girl up to the second floor of the church, and French kissed her and said, I'm so lonely, I need a girlfriend. And she had the presence of mind. She's like, what, 11?
Oh, dear God.
Yeah. That's horrible, unacceptable. We took care of that as soon as we could, but the damage was done.
Right.
And what concerned me was that some of the people in that wonderful, loving church, and they were wonderful people, there were a handful of people who said, well, he won't do it again. He will do it again. And then we find out stories that he was a peeping Tom and that he had always been covered because people felt sorry for him.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, is good people allowed horrible things to happen. Now, as a minister, what I did was basically said, we're not going to excommunicate you. We could have done that, but you can't come back. I'm going to be your minister, and I'm going to be there, but because the family didn't want to press charges, I would have supported pressing charges.
Wow, right.
For that.
I know you've dealt a lot with this.
Yeah, and so
stuff.
it was horrific, and we had a presbytery that was involved with it. In other words, it's a presbytery is a group of churches together, and they have an organization. And we we actually did sessions with the congregation to heal that, provided counseling for the young lady, for the girl, and their family.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you dealt with it. I want to take it even a step further and to even broaden our minds even a little bit more, to where oftentimes I feel like, let's just take the family unit that goes to certain faith tradition and whatever it might be of any sort, and here's messages and a simple example where I feel like families in their family unit mistakenly operate. They hear something and they operate. I'm the head of the household, and spare the rod and spoil the child. Right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. And then from that you have this religious experience that becomes traumatic for this child who is ultimately physically abused.
Right.
And we had an example of that literally that came out with the football player. I forget which one it is, but he was sparing the rod, or
he wasn't sparing the rod.
Yeah, he wasn't. Right. I said that wrong, didn't I?
Yeah, he took a rod and did that. And he interpreted black and white. I mean, in other words, and the other thing that people quote a lot of times is from Ephesians, and that is that the man is the head of the house. So Paul talks about that, the Apostle Paul. Well, but Paul also says, you got to think in terms of context when it was written. It was the first century. It's the first writings of Scripture in the epistle, and it said something very radical. Love your wife as Christ loves his church.
Yeah, I've heard that one before.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, it's paternalistic. Yeah. So, the thing is, but it talked about a greater good, and that's why you need to have good preaching, because you want to make sure that
probably
that's
some
not
very poor preachers out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of us. I'm one of them.
No, you're not a poor preacher.
Yeah.
Well, maybe poverty, but no. Poorly delivered sermons.
You're keeping me poor, Chris.
Right. We're going to do a better job when moving forward. But no, I want to think also as well about Muslim faith traditions and even Buddhist faith traditions. I mean, I'm not as knowledgeable about that because I've just had personal circles in the Christian faith traditions and whatever, but I'd be willing to bet that these types of things that operate in those faith traditions kind of is just the same. Because here's my big point, and what I want to begin having us talk about is we're really needing to think about how the individual experienced that trauma and how we get out of that trauma and how we help that person who has managed to get stuck or fallen into those types of experiences that we've been talking about so far. So that's where we want to get to, so that I think we have a pretty good idea of what it is that we're talking about. And I think we have an understanding, hopefully a little bit, that, hey, this too can happen in your congregation or religious circles. So how do we deal with it once we find it? When you get caught up with it, what do you do to help people? I want to just make that open to you, I guess, to start, John. What's your approach? How do you deal with this?
Okay. Well, it's Carl Rogers would say, unconditional positive regard, in other words.
I love that stuff.
Yeah. And so I'm not the expert. The person that is sitting across in the chair or the couch is the expert of his or her own life and where they are. And so what you do is you listen intently, you see their story, you get their narrative. And
love it.
Yeah. And you don't respond right away. You just talk, okay. And you go down and you focus a little bit more, or for clarifications, or you see their body language, what's going on, and if you see somebody that's like withdrawn or
constricted,
avoiding, then you're able to say, okay, where do we go? Because that person has been so hurt that they don't want to be beaten anymore. And I'm not just talking about physical beating, but emotional,
absolutely.
Yeah. Or they feel so much guilt. I work with people in shame. I have a lot of people that, and I think one of the areas where I think faith, a healthy Christianity, or healthy faith or religion, would be that person knows that it's a non-judgment zone, and so that they've everything that they have been that's been beaten into them is not right, and so that they can see and experience God or their Creator or their sense of oneness and wholeness in a non-judgmental way.
It's funny. I'm going to fire through a list that I created in my mind as I was doing the show prep on how to approach people and how to approach the topic, and I think he just hit a lot of what I came up with too when I was thinking about this. But I had a different thought. I've never had this before when I was thinking about this part of how do you approach people and how do you deal with the issue with somebody that's had bad religious experiences. What do you? I know this isn't a total truth statement, but maybe pretty close. What do you think about this statement, John?
Uh-oh.
So, yeah. So when you hear the person, could be a buddy, it could be a friend, it could be a colleague, whatever. Whenever you hear the comment, oh, I don't deal with those organized religions. That organized religion stuff is it's not for me. Boom. To me, in my mind, I had never thought of this before, but when I hear that in my mind, I wonder if that's a pretty strong indication that something along the way has
Something
happened.
toxic has happened.
Right. Something along the way has been toxic for this person. I think that's almost, I don't know if that's 100%.
Yeah.
But that's got to be pretty close, right?
Right. And or they're hypocrites. They're all hypocrites. That if you're at a church, you're
distrust.
It's distrust. I can't trust you because you're going to say one thing and you're going to do another.
Right.
And so I think they have been wounded by toxic religion. Have I been given? I have, in my own experience, been exposed to some toxic elements in religion. For example, there was back in the 70s, wow, it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world, it's the end of the world, and fire and brimstone, and I'd hear Herbert W. Armstrong on the radio.
Well, to a certain extent, we all were with Oral Roberts and not Oral Roberts, the sex scandal people that took a lot of money. There's a few of them, Jimmy Baker,
Jim and Tammy Baker. For example, but and so there's a lot of toxicity in that as well because it's manipulation, and it really doesn't further the kingdom of God. As you can hear, I'm a pretty orthodox person.
Yeah,
I don't bang it on people's heads or anything like that. I think one of the most things that we could do, the best things we could do, is if you're a minister or clergy or someone that's in a church, is that you have to be authentic. And one way is that you would ask in a prayer, not what would Jesus do, but what would Jesus have me do? And that way it's more of a sense of a servant relationship.
Usually, servants.
Not as the boss.
Not boss. Not authoritarian. Not condemning. Not aggressive. A lot of things. So
I got off on the track.
I'm really curious. No, we're on point, I think. I'm curious what you think about my list, John. So how to approach people who are caught up in a bad religious experience. A, misspell the belief that I could never get caught up in this.
Yes.
Again,
that's
I just...
Bingo.
I did that a little while ago. I think that's such a big thing. B, compassion and seeking understanding.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned that.
Listen.
C, avoid I'm right and you're wrong statements and inferences and those types of things.
Yeah.
That's not going to help. D, contact directly with the shame-based feelings. Like understand that shame is there. I think you had mentioned that. Share your own questions and thus trigger the discussion. Like, ask questions. What do you see? What do you think? What did you hear? How did this operate from you? Like, as you said, I think, get the story and all right. Be a safe source. So you want to really convey the lack of judgment, right? You want to convey the belief structure of this is going to again trigger more discussion, and then avoid being a witness yourself. This is not your role to witness to them, to use a religious term. At least you be perceived as trying to convert them.
Right.
That's not your role.
Now
either.
That's as a therapist, right?
This is as a therapist, or honestly, I was thinking about it as these are kind of like suggestions and how anybody would want to go about.
Yeah, if you're working with, in a sense. Yeah. Because that person has to be open and know that they're not going to be judged for having what the beliefs of that cult, for example, or the toxic faith that we've been talking about. That they can feel fully accepted, unconditional acceptance.
And the last thing I had was addressed directly the potential for anger towards God himself, or quote unquote organized religion. And that's when I've developed, when I was doing my thinking and listening on this, that's when I developed that thought. I'm like, oh, wait a minute.
Well, you can teach a course at a seminary.
Yeah, oh dear gosh. I don't know that I'm qualified to do that.
That's the yeah.
Maybe I am.
Yeah. Well, I've done hospital chaplaincy, and you get people that are like, when somebody's a loved one has died and it's unfair, it's horrible and it's terrible, and he took them too soon and all that. I'm angry at God. I don't want to talk to him.
Yeah.
And what would you say?
What would I say?
What would you say, brother?
I would say that that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay to be upset with God.
He
can take.
Yeah.
He can take it.
He can take it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been pissed off with him more than once.
We've
had lots of discussions. I tell you, man.
One of my first experiences was dealing with working with a woman who was in the hospital in Roanoke, Virginia, and she had grown up in the church, and she'd had some real troubles. She'd married somebody that was very cheated on her quite a bit, and she started drinking, and she kept drinking, and she had 5 children, and she was taking care of them. She lost her license as a nurse.
Oh man!
And she was dying, and she was bleeding out. She had the esophageal varices, basically where she would drown in her own blood. Yeah, it's horrible. And I got jumped out of my car, and I just screamed at God at the top of my lungs. I said, "This is so unfair. This is not right.
Yeah.
How could you let this happen?"
Right.
And he didn't strike me down.
Thankfully, you didn't get the religious lightning bolt.
No. He opened me up.
Right.
Yeah. To a little humility for myself, to be humble. And,
yeah, I think people honestly are afraid to deal directly with, the anger and the feelings that were created, with the religiously traumatic reality that this person experienced any level of toxicity. And that needs to be invited. And just like we would in therapy when somebody's anger about, any number of things they've experienced with trauma or, this type of thing. For therapists out there, I would just say a lot of what you operate with trauma realities, it's a lot of the same stuff that you would do with toxic religious trauma. Yeah. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. And I think really I would emphasize not to try to convert somebody. And I think that's really
you're not a witness. You're not being a if you
see, in that case, you really, if you're a person of faith, you are actually being more faithful as a witness. You're being an ambassador.
I just had a horrible thought of feeling of like how many times have the poor Jehovah's Witness people or whatever gone knocking on the doors or whatever, doing their witnessing and doing their, their fellowship and discipleship and everything. And they come across somebody who's been toxically religiously traumatized. That could be a bad scene.
Yeah. When I was listen, I love Jehovah's Witness. But I was a single pastor before I married my lovely wife, Joy Marie Pope. Is that I was up in West Virginia at my church.
Good state.
Great state.
You were in West Virginia?
Gorgeous. I was in West Virginia. I was in Ronceverte, Lewisburg.
Dude, man. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna talk after the show.
And she would a mother and a daughter would come by, and they would bring me pies.
The Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, they would talk to me about. I said, "Will you pray with me?"
And you got more pie.
I got more. No, she wouldn't pray. So, but they were well intentioned and good, honest, godly people.
Yeah.
But just a very different view of Scripture.
Oh,
but,
indeed, yes, some would say.
But I got a lot of pie.
That is awesome. Yeah. You got a lot of pie. You keep coming, pray with me, bring your pies. Listen, so how do we recover from bad religious experiences? We're talking about how to interact with people, but I really want to highlight, what episode was that on my notes? We did an excellent show on 139 with, that's what Lavon, or what was her name? Lavon Ray. Am I saying that right? Lavon Earl, right? Yeah, okay. On episode 139, and we took a really good deep dive on this. So we're just doing a little segment here, today. But I really want to highlight for anybody that's listened to that, or listening to this show, and we're giving just a segment to it. We did a whole show on this, and I don't know, John. I guess I'm highlighting that a little bit because I don't know about you, but whenever this comes up in my therapy office, like. I really like. Sometimes I've even said a quick prayer to myself, like, Lord, let me just do your work right here. And I am so honored by it, and a little bit intimidated, to be honest with you, a little bit, with dealing with this issue, because I have a personal little bit of countertransference. Like I said, this topic kind of pisses me off. When I come with it, and it's such a big deal to me to work with people through this process of recovering from this life experience they've had.
But that's a stuck point that because that may have been some of your experience too, that when you were a kid or a young adult or something like that, where that gets you angry because you've experienced some of that toxicity.
Dang, Neil, I just got onto the chair here. How did I land in the therapist's couch?
Well, you talked about countertransference.
No, you're totally good. Go further.
Yeah,
I have no problem with that.
Countertransference. Yeah. So that's an area, but the where I think people, they need to be heard, they need to process. And so in a way you could treat it like cognitive processing therapy or REBT.
Right.
And you can dispute, help them learn how to dispute the irrational thoughts, that they could develop critical thinking skills. And yes, I think you can have critical thinking skills and be devout in faith. So.
Yeah. I want to go back because I think I made a joke and tried to make light of it to take it on. I don't want to go away from that related to the stuck spot that I have, and I will think about that because I don't. It's interesting. I think that the countertransference kind of stuff that I feel with this is just because, to me, a relationship with God is so important and a pretty pivotal thing, that I've experienced in my life. That
even Christ throughout that turned over the tables of the money changers.
Oh, absolutely.
In the temple.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. Where my anger kind of comes in.
It's a righteous anger,
right? Because to take something so pure and so foundational, whether you're talking about Muslim or Buddhist beliefs, that is supposed to be pure peace and pure love, and turn it at something that hurts people so deeply.
Yeah,
just bothers.
Well, it's a holy gift, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a precious gift, and that somebody could turn it into something and manipulate
so
it.
Bad,
so bad. Yeah. And there's people that could be angry and that have received some toxic faith or toxic beliefs that has scarred them, and it could be given by people that are generally very loving and kind people. It's just that
that's the truth.
Yeah, it's passed on generation by generation. A lot of what we think in the South is Christianity, is more churchianity. It's the Southern,
them churchy people.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think that that's what I'm getting at there, because I've had mostly wonderful religious experiences. I mean, it is, we can share this off the air that, I've had, even Calvary Chapel for a little while. Some kind of really cool stuff happened there, and as a young, I was an altar boy. I don't know if you know that, John. I was in the Catholic faith tradition, and I've enjoyed the non-traditional stuff that we currently deal with. But it's just that just turning something so pure into something that can be so bad, I think is just. So how do we recover from bad religious experience? Let me go through my thoughts there, and then John will just kind of fuddle that around with what you're thinking and seeing there. So dealing with a denial system is really, to me, a huge starting spot. The this didn't happen to me. This would never happen in our congregation.
Denial.
What you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's
well, that happened at my small church.
Yeah, that wasn't what it was. We can't talk about it, and we need to help him. We need to be good, and kind, and godly, and non-punitive, and whatever. I mean, people don't see this right in front of their freaking eyes.
Yeah,
is what's amazing to me. And so we need to deal with that denial system and break that down, much like we do with addiction. Because I know you work with substance abuse. And then what did I think? Coming out of this with a child and being, followed by your young adulthood, there's that high frequency of anger, that I was talking about before, or even avoidance altogether. It needs to be dealt with directly in part of the recovery component. And then how kind of like other traumas I think I mentioned before. So maybe I already covered this and didn't know it. When you're doing trauma treatment and therapy, you're going to do a lot of the same stuff in trauma treatment with religious topics. And then lastly, really focusing on developing or finding, guiding. And LaVon Earl talked about this amazingly with the guilt and the shame and letting go of that and freeing yourself even in the self-talk and the self-messaging that you've got going on that is just so destructive when you're dealing with toxicity in religion that creates a runaway train with condemning yourself and, feeling bad as a person and all of the contradiction that we have inside. So I don't know. I could go on and on.
Well, let's say you were coerced into a sexual encounter with, let's say, a church leader, a pastor, or something of this sort, and you feel guilty and you say, I'm never going to be forgiven of this.
Absolutely,
okay.
Yeah.
There's nothing that you did was wrong. And that to be able to help that person process through that says that God loves you regardless, whatever. There's no one's better than the other person. We're all, in a sense, we're all before God. We're the same. And
oh dear, you mean there's that judgment day?
Yeah. Well, I think we fear it more than and maybe I think it's more of what we see is to be made whole, and so that can be painful.
Made whole and learned.
And learn and keep learning. And I think when we are in eternity with God, I think we'll be learning all the time. And so it may not always be easy.
That's an interesting.
Yeah, but it's not something that we earn. It's what we receive.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's powerful. I appreciate that. There was an article that is in these show notes that I thought was cool that they pointed out in its way of, how do we recover? And I'm just going to quote them because I thought it was really well said. There are two fundamental axioms to remember in dealing with some of the after effects. One, we are socialized to respond to and respect authority figures. I thought, wow, that's really true.
That's in everything.
Right? Absolutely. And then two, we're social animals who respond very much to peer pressure. So keeping that in mind may help ease some of the guilt and the shame. I just thought that was just brilliant.
You think about it. Let's say somebody comes from a dysfunctional home. We're all dysfunctional to a certain extent.
Well, mine's more functional than yours.
Yeah. Oh, mine is.
Yeah, we can debate.
But there's a sense that they don't have a lot of order. They don't have there's chaos. And you suddenly get into this group where you, on the surface, seem to be totally accepted and loved. And in fact, you are getting manipulated and used. And so there's going to be a lot of that pain that person will say about themselves. How did I get into this?
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of the guilt and the shame that's there as well.
That's a common theme. It's almost as a setup, you're saying.
Yeah, it's set up.
Oh, okay, interesting, yeah. Yeah, that would be fun to do another segment. We don't have time to totally do it, but you're alluding to like an interesting thought, which totally goes probably why I didn't think of doing this, because I would really need to learn. What are the characteristics that you might look out for that create some of the setup that would make you more likely to fall into the grasp of some of this?
Well, I think there's the predators. Yes. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing, and so they're going to find and get to the disaffected youth or let's say older person that's isolated, and we'll say, well, you can belong here, and you can be a part of this.
I like that you pointed out older folks too.
Yeah, older. Oh, definitely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there.
I have a client who has a mother living with them, and they observe her. Oh, it's so sad. Like, and they get so frustrated, like totally giving all our money over there to the group. It's just. Ugh.
So, in other words, there's diminished sense of being able to make decisions, and so you look for somebody that is vulnerable, and that's where that person gets in there and recruits them basically into the cult.
I'm going to make my last point with the wrap up here in just a moment. But John, how would you wrap us up? This has been an awesome topic to talk to you because you have such a wealth of knowledge and depth.
Well, you do. This. I mean, my goodness, what a wonderful list that you came in. I'm going, yes.
Well, we matched up a lot.
Yeah, we did. We were congruent.
What would you like to say to folks that might be in this or,
Yeah, I would say that there is a way out, and that there's a way of that you could find that peace that you've been looking for, that void that can be filled. But it's not in the cult. It's not in the leader. It's more in terms of your being set free as and to be able to know that you're loved. That love is unconditional, and that there are ways that you can reach out and find help and assistance.
I love that. That is super well said. Thank you, John, and thank you for sharing your expertise and the wealth of experience that you have, because I think there's a lot of people that are out there and hurting with this topic. You may feel sometimes that this is one big murky mesh of mess that seems impossible to get your arms wrapped around or to get handled. And the last point that I want to really leave to you, when you've had these types of experiences that you may have gone through on any small level or as dramatic a level as some people have experienced with cults that involve suicide and crazy things, I want to encourage you to not be alone with those thoughts. This might be a show that you listen to that you wanted to just tip your toe into the water, and I hope that you've heard some things that can be helpful to you, because here's the big point. I don't want you to do it alone. Like, listen to some of the things we're talking about. Listen to some of the things that we've spoken on here, to take a little bit of a step and allow somebody into that space that you're safe, that you trust, so that you can really recover from these horrible things that do happen in the light of religion. Because it is very hard to make sense out of these things that people use religious doctrine even against to create this pain and this toxicity. So please don't be alone. Please know that there's hope. John, I loved your summary, and I appreciate you being here with us on this topic today.
Thank you. Enjoyed being here.
All right.
Okay.
You guys have a great week. Next week, a reminder, we got the month in review. It'll be the first month in review. And I think, John, abnormally, we are going to have you join us with Adam and I to do a month in review, right? Okay. Cool. So we'll see you guys next week. Take care.